Welcome to Earthflakes, my name is Tony. In this tutorial I will cover pretty much anything you need to know about the curves tools in Davinci Resolve. Whether you are a beginner or an experienced user, mastering the curves tools is essential for achieving great looking color grades, and the curves are one of the most versatile and powerful tools you have. I'll start by explaining you the basics of curves and how they work, and then we will dive into some practical examples showing you how you can use them effectively in your own projects and what you have to be careful with. And when we're done, you should be pretty confident with using the curves in your own work. But before we jump into Resolve, I just wanted to take a quick moment to express how deeply grateful I am to each and every one of you who hit that subscribe button. The channel has grown so much in the last couple of months, and we just passed 20,000 subscribers, which is crazy to me. But the support means so much to me, and subscription it's more than just a number. I truly feel it's a vote of confidence. Putting your name and your face out there for critique and comments it's been a big step, but watching the channel grow is truly amazing. So thank you for that. And with that said, let's get back to business and jump straight into Resolve.
Custom curves.
So the curves tools refers to the custom curves and the 6 additional tools you'll find here in the curves palette in the middle of the color page. You'll often hear all the curves tools referred to as hue versus curves, or just the curves tools in general. So they're split up into the input signal that you'll see on the x-axis down here at the bottom. You have an input signal overlay here to visualize where you'll find the data in the image. And on the y-axis you have the output signal. You can switch from input to output signal if you go to the optional menu and you can choose histogram, and you can see the output signal. Nothing's going to change here because we didn't do any changes, but in general you probably want the histogram to show you the output signal. Now the way you add points as selections to the curve is by clicking on the curve. So you can, for example, click anywhere on the curve. Let me just pull this out so we can see it a little bit better. So if I click on the curve, you can see I've added a control point, and then I can start to tweak around that point. But I don't know if you noticed, but when you click a point, you might see a slight change to the curve. So even though the manual says you can shift click, it doesn't always lock exactly to the center line. So instead, if you hold down Alt or Option key and you click, you will see the center line visualized, and if you drag away from it, you can see where it is. And if you hold Alt down while you move your point, at some point when you get closer, it will snap to your center line like so. So Alt clicking is a good way to make sure you're on the center line, and then holding it down, you can slide your points up and down the curve like so. Now, if you want to adjust the points a little bit further, you can go back to the optional menu, and you can click editable splines, and it'll give you a Bezier curve, so you can smoothen out your curves like so if you need that. So just give you a more fine control of the curves. I'm going to reset that. You also have the option in the optional menu to click default anchors, and Davinci will add it up into 5 sections. I'm just going to remove the editable splines, and now you have a good starting point, and this is typically how you would do your contrast selections like so. But something you might notice, even though you have a lock point here, let me just reset these 2 points by right clicking them. You notice here, if I slide up here and hold the Alt key, when I raise the shadows here, you can see even behind the control point, the curve is moving away from the center line. So if you absolutely want nothing to happen beyond your control point, what you can do is you can Alt click and set a new control point. Now you have to get a little bit away from the first control point. You can't click here, you have to move it a little bit away, and then you can switch that back into the center line like so. And now any adjustments you do here will be 100% locked for this point. It's a little weird thing it does here, and it only happens in the custom curve, but it's nice to know how it works. Now you can see the signal down here on the waveform, and you can also expand that by pulling in. So you pull in the blacks, and if you pull in the whites, you can see you're expanding the whole graph and the whole signal. And you can also compress the output signal by using the slider over here on the left. Normally that's not something I will use, but it's nice to know you have the option here. So if you take a look at the options you have under the curve here, you have everything linked. You have the luminance, and your red, green and blue channel will be linked by default, but you can of course unlink them, and then you can work on either channel separately. And you can, for example, set a point on your red channel, and then you can move that up individually. You can go to the blue channel, set a point to lock that down, add a little bit of blue in the shadows like so, and you can work on everything totally individually. So below that you have an opacity slider for each of the channels, and you would probably think that okay, 0 is 0 opacity and 100 is 100, but this works a little bit different, because actually here it goes to opacity of 0 when you have a value number of 50. Below 50 you go invert. So if you set everything here at 50 and then you enable and disable the node, nothing's gonna change in the picture at all. And below that you have a soft clip option. So let's just move over to the next color chart here. And if you have raised the signal, so you can see if I link everything again back together, you can see in the waveform down here, I'm just bringing the whole signal in like so. So the shadows and the highlights, but you can see how everything is cut off like so. So you can actually lift your lower signal using the low, and you can bring your highs down a little bit if you need to. And if you don't want this sharp edge here at the bottom, if you want a little roll off, you can use the low soft. That will just add a knee, as you can see down at the bottom, and the high soft will add a nice roll off as well at the top.
Hue versus hue.
So let's jump to the first option we have after the costume curves, the hue versus hue. This lets you change any hue to another hue. I just have a node-based project, color managed project that I set up here, and so I'm working in Davinci Wide Gamut. And here I have a hue versus hue node, and what it does is it lets you select a hue and switch the hue on the vector scope for it. So if I go over here, I have the vector scope enabled. So you'll need to select a hue, and you can do that in 4 ways. If you look at the bottom here, you can see you have 6 presets. So you have the primary and secondary colors. So you have your red, yellow, green, cyan, blue, and magentas. So if you click, let's say the yellow, if you want to change the color of the door, it will select the whole area from the previous color to the next color. So you have a wide range of colors you will change, or hues you will change within that selection. So using these tools, and that goes for all of the curves tools here, you need to be careful with your roll-offs. You don't want to do crazy stuff like this and push it too far, you'll get artifacts real quick. So what you want to do is make sure you have some nice gentle selections, and always look at your image. So for example here, I can bring up the hue of the door, but since we're using a pretty wide selection, you can see we're affecting her skin as well. So presets are a very good way to get a quick selection, but it's pretty broad. But you can make a much finer selection with qualifiers. So if you go to the tool menu and you select a qualifier, let's click on the door up here. Now you can see we have a selection that's only half as wide as the previous selection. And now we can switch that up. We can switch it around like so. And you can see we have a much cleaner selection. And the good thing about this is you made a broad selection and you don't need to do any tracking. So whatever you do here is going to be a wide selection that's going to look pretty good. So we can also change the design up here. And instead of using the qualifier here, I can use just manually click and set your lock points. This is pretty easy to see where the colors are. So we can bring that up or down like so. And now we change the hue. And the last option you have is also to manually insert a hue value. So if you go down, if you select that point here, you can change it. You can just simply input whatever value you have in the box. Something to be aware of if we open this up. So you might notice when I click here, I might get off the center line, especially when you have a smaller window. So you can reset that by double clicking the rotate point here. And then you can also use the input hue value. You can drag that left to right to adjust it, and you can use the hue rotate by sliding the numbers up and down like so, or you can reset them like that. So this tool can be very useful if you have a lot of noise in the image. So let me just show you an example here. So if I have the selection here of the door here, you can see how that looks pretty good. Even if I zoom in, I got a pretty nice selection of the yellows. But if I reset that, if I were to use the qualifier tool, so if I go to the qualifier and select the door up here and I go to highlight, you can see all the chatter you get, and this is not going to look nice, and you can fine tune it and blur it out and try to clean it up, but that's just a hassle, and it takes a lot of work. So the better option in this case would definitely be to go to the hue versus hue and then select the door and then tweak it from here. So a very, very useful tool, especially if you have noise in your image.
Hue versus sat.
So the next curves tool here is hue versus sat. Hue versus sat lets you selectively change the saturation of any hue in the image. So let's take a look at this image, for example, and let's say we want to add a little more depth to the image. So we want to maybe take down the saturation in the green. So I'm going to use the qualifier. I'm going to turn that on over here and select the green part. Maybe take this point and make it a little bit broader. Take this point and bring down the saturation just a little bit in the greens in the background. And let's say her hat needed some more pop, so we can select that, click on that. We have the point down here, and we can also see the bump here in the input signal, so we know we're in the right place. Add a little pop to the hat, and let's say we also want to bring out her skin a little bit because maybe it's a little dull like so, so we can add little saturation to her skin and her jacket. So the cool thing about this is it gives you very clean selections, and when you play it around it just looks natural. You don't need to track anything again, and with a few easy steps we created a lot of depth to the image. So let's take a look here before and after. So this is a very useful tool if you have oversaturated colors or you need to create some color contrast in a flat image.
Hue versus luminance.
This tool lets you increase or decrease the lightness of elements of specific colors. So if we go back to this clip here, if I make a new note here and I call this hue versus lum. So what you can do is you could selectively change the luminosity of a color. So if you click on it, you can bring it down like so. Or you can click and hold, and then you can bring the luminosity of the whole image up and down like so. So for example, if you're doing some commercial work and you want it to really pop, you can just bring everything up like so. Or if the door is a little too much on the bright side, you can isolate that and then bring down that alone and maybe make it a little wider like so and bring that down. So a very quick way again to change the luminosity of any hue. But this is a tool you have to be very careful with. Even on better footage, higher quality footage like this, you can see how quickly we introduce artifacts and banding up here. So it's definitely something you have to look out for. But with high quality footage, this is a great way to add richness and density in your colors, or to make some of the colors pop with more lightness.
Luminance versus sat.
Luminosity versus sat is a curve that lets you make changes to the saturation based on the tonality in the image rather than on the hue. So on this image here, I created a look that introduced a lot of teal and cyan in the highlights and a little warmth to the darker areas of the image here. But let's say you wanted to clean up the highlights. Let's say you want them to be more white and don't have the cyan seeping through. So you can choose the luminosity versus sat. And on the right hand side you have areas of high luminosity, and on the left hand side you have areas of low luminosity. So the highlights up here, if we go to the waveform let me just pop the waveform out. You can see we have a lot of blue and green and thus cyan in the highlights. And if you want to clean that up, you can see on your output signal or your input signal down here that you have some highlights here that starts over here. So if I bring that down and then I take a look at my waveform up here and start to push it down even further, you can see how I'm getting everything aligned. And now I clean the very high highlights. If I want to clean this part up as well, I can move the point a little bit further and I can drag it over like so. Now you see you have perfectly clean highlights. So if I right click on the image and show pick a value, you can see I have perfect white highlights here. So a great curve to use for creative looks, or if you have colors that go out of bounds or illegal limits, then you can use this to bring it back.
Sat versus sat.
So the Sat versus Sat tool lets you manipulate saturation within the areas defined by the image's original saturation. So any changes you make on the left-hand side of the curve affects areas with lower saturation, and on the right-hand side you affect areas with higher saturation levels. So let's say you want to pump in a little bit of saturation in the foreground here. You can see we have good level of saturation in the sky and then the red up here in the neon. So what you can do is you can isolate the parts down here and then bring up slowly the saturation levels in the foreground like so. And if I pop that up in full screen, you can see before and after, not really affecting the sky or the red neon signs, but I am pumping a bit more saturation into the foreground. One thing to notice, if you want to have a little more fine-tuned control over the point here, you can select the Bezier curve here and you can manipulate it a little bit more precisely like so if that's your need. So this is a useful tool to stylize an image or to give it, I believe the scientific term is pop. If you want an image to pop a little bit, this is a tool that you can use for that.
Sat versus luminance.
So the inverse to the Lume versus Sat curve is the Sat versus Lume curves. This curve is a quick way to adjust the luminance of pixels within a specific saturation range. So you can see, maybe you like the red, but you feel like it's kind of too bright. So what you can do is you can take that part of the image. So we set a control point here and we bring down the luminosity in those areas. Let's see, when we start, might need to go a bit further over like so. Yeah, here we go. Now if I make it full screen and turn the node on and off, you can see we still preserve all the saturation in the colors, but we just bring down and we still keep the highlights and the clean whites over here. So this curve is useful to emulate one of the properties of film where highly saturated colors block more light from passing through than less saturated colors, or you can use it as a quick way to darken skies with high saturation levels.
Using curves to create looks.
The flexibility of the curve tools also makes them a great tool to create looks. So let's use a couple of the curves to do that. So in this image here, I'm gonna use the hue versus hue, and I want to change the sky to make it look like a bit more cyan. So I'm gonna bump it up like so. Then we go into hue versus sat, and I'm going to increase the yellow here. Gonna pump in a little more saturation in the house and in his skin, and maybe also in the hotel sign up here. Gonna bump that up as well, and maybe just give this guy a little bit more saturation. There you go, something like that. And then I'm going to move over to hue versus luma. And what you can do is to add a little more density is you can click on the line, and then if you hold down while you drag, you can drag the whole line down a little bit like so. So fast and easy way to create a look. You don't need to do any qualifications, so just looks really organic right out of the box.
Where should I place curves in the node tree?
Now, one thing to be aware of is where in the pipeline you put your nodes. So here I'm working in Davinci Wide Gamut, and the last color space transform is taking me back out to Rec 709 Gamut 2.4. So now I'm working in Davinci Wide Gamut with these nodes. So if I grab a still from here, and then I release the nodes by pressing E, and then you can drag it over to the Rec 709 part of the image, like so. And now if I swipe between the two, and I go full screen, you can see the Rec 709 on the left, and you can see the adjustments I made in Davinci Wide Gamut on the right. And you can see, I don't know if you can see it on YouTube, but there's a lot more artifacts in the Rec 709, so you really have to be careful where you place your nodes in the node tree. Just something to be aware of. So as you can see, the curves tools can be extremely useful, and they offer a lot of manual control over your image. Just be careful, don't push things too far, and always check the changes you've made for artifacts and banding, especially with lower quality footage. Thanks for watching, and I hope you found this helpful and that you are now much more comfortable using the curves. So please don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more tutorials and smash that like button. It really means a lot. Catch you on the next one.